Okay, grade 11s. Here's our quick Unit 5. And for the first little bit, I'm just going to review what you already learned with Mrs. Edwards. With her, you did 5.1 and 5.2 and 5.3. So 5.1 was about exploring graphs. You talked about dispersion. That's how spread out the data all is. You talked about mean, which is finding the average of the data. So you would add up all the data and then you would divide by the number of data, just like you found the average for your last many years since you've been calculating such things. Okay, then you talked about the median, which is the very center of the data. If you put all the data in order and you count one at a time to the middle of your data, that's the median. And the mode is the number that occurs the most within your data. We call the mean, median, and mode measures of central tendency. So they all tell us something about the center of the data. With Mrs. Edwards, you use the graphing calculators to find this data really quickly. I think you also probably practiced it doing it by hand. We are going to use a online statistics calculator that is shown here. It is pretty simple. I can just give you an example here. We're going to type in a bunch of numbers, the list of data, separated by commas. Like this, for example. And I'm randomly punching in a list. Okay, there, I've put in a bunch of numbers. What I do then is click Submit Data, and bam, it gives you, you can see the mean, represented by that symbol mu. It gives you the median, okay, the very center of the data when I would arrange all the numbers in order. It gives you the mode, the piece of the data that occurs the most often. It also gives you the lowest value, highest value, the range of the data between the lowest and the highest, and some of these other things down here will be in the sections coming up. Anyways, this online statistics calculator does the calculations lickety-split and is a little easier to use than graphing calculators. If you would like to, you can go to that graphing calculator link. It is found in Google Classroom in the web or in the page that you are watching this video from. All right, and 5.2. You discussed and did an assignment looking at frequency tables, histograms, and frequency polygons. I'm not sure if you entered your data into a spreadsheet like Google Sheets. In Google Sheets, it's pretty easy to instantly create a histogram or other kinds of charts that represent data. But maybe you drew some with Mrs. Edwards in 5.2. Then 5.3 is entitled Standard Deviation. And you learned that the word deviation means the difference between the data value, so each piece of data, and the mean or the average of that set of data. And I believe you calculated this by hand, and maybe you even used the graphing calculators to find this. The mean, or the average, we talked about it up here, we usually use X bar to represent that, the average of the set of data. So we use that symbol when we're finding standard deviation. So the deviation is the data difference between the data value, we'll say X, of that specific piece of data, subtract the mean of that data. So that was the little formula you used to find the deviation. Then you also talked about standard deviation. So standard deviation, its definition is the measure of how spread out the data values are in relation to the average of that data. So if I'm teaching a class and the average on your math test is, let's say, 80%, then I want to know, what is your score compared to the average? Or what's the difference between your score and the average of the whole class? Generally, a teacher would like the standard deviation to be low. That means most people are close to the average. If we have a high standard deviation, that means some people are very far away from the average. Either they're much lower than the average or they're much higher than the average. We use the symbol sigma, a Greek letter, to represent standard deviation. So, standard deviation uses a formula. And we talk about, and you probably did this, it's a lot of calculation. Standard deviation equals, first of all, we find the difference between your test score, your grade, and we subtract the average of the class. So we find, how is each data value different from the class average? We take that and we square the answer, and then we add all those answers up. So that little e, I'm forgetting the name of it. It also has a Greek name. That means sum. So for each data value we do this. We square it, and then we add all those data differences up. Then we take and we divide it by the number of data pieces that we have, n. And our answer then, after we divide it, we take the square root of the whole thing. And shazam, that tells you the standard deviation of your whole set of data. How much does it differ from the average? It's a big formula. And I believe you practice this. It's a lot of typing in if you're entering data into a graphing calculator. It's a lot of work too if you're doing it all by hand. We're going to use the online calculator to try some examples with that. Okay, that's really a great summary of what you've learned so far in Unit 5. I'm going to shut this video down now, and you can proceed to the 5.4 lesson, okay, to continue learning about this.